And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon. It's the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
Johnny, if you'd like to email us, you could do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. I'm legitimately curious how far these radio signals go. So whether you're listening on 790 in Southern California or 810 in Northern California, tell us where you're listening from. Katrina writes in and says, whenever I drive all the way up to Morro Bay from Orange County, I get 790 up through Santa Maria.
I didn't know the signal went up into Santa Barbara County.
That's awesome. I got to try that next time I go up to wine country.
We get emails sometimes from people in Idaho and Oregon listening to us on KSFO.
Oh, yeah. That signal at night goes everywhere. It's a huge, massive radio station that we are so happy to be on.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the national political correspondent for McClatchy, D.C. You can read him online at McClatchyDC.com and follow him on X at Dave Catanese. David Catanese, welcome.
Hey, John, good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by. So let's start out with the big national political news going on right now in Washington, D.C., and that is this game of tariffs right now with China and the rest of the world, and I guess you can put those two in two different categories at this point. Donald Trump appears to me, maybe it's different to you, where he's trying to isolate China from the rest of the world, and he's trying to do it through trade tariffs. What do you make of what's happened so far, and where do you think we're headed?
Well, I can say I'm surprised but not shocked at the pullback. If you have been at the White House the last few days, the script has been day after day that the president was going to stick with these tariffs, that there were going to be no exceptions, no carve-outs, that this was going to be, they were in it for the long term. And then, frankly, it wasn't the stock market that scared the president. It was really the bond market and the fact that he thought this could cause a recession, but his economic advisors started to tell him it could cause a depression. So they said, hey, let's pull this back. Instead of making it a blanket across the board, tariff war against every country, many of them allies, let's target it on China. The problem, though, is that China is such a big part of the world's economy that I don't think it has necessarily cooled investors' fears. The S&P is still down. I think it was down another 3.5% today. So I don't think we're really out of the woods yet for the market reckoning, simply because the China tariffs are pretty much unprecedented and don't look like they're going to be resolved anytime soon.
You've written extensive profiles in the past on former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And I don't know if you read her most recent book, the book about power, which was, I guess it came out right after she sent Grampy Joe to the glue factory. And I read the book, I think it was last summer, and the longest chapter in the book was about China. And she regards herself as being the foremost expert on China in the United States Congress and gives herself that credit with the pat on the back. But she is an extreme critic of that government and has been for decades. And when you read the chapter, essentially her take on China is that they are doing horrible things. They're not respecting human rights, religious liberty. They are manipulating markets. They're stealing intelligence. They don't allow American companies to have access to their courts. And the only way to teach them a lesson, the only way to get them to fall in line and to become part of the global community in that regard is through trade. And it's a mistake to put them in the World Trade Organization. It's a mistake to give them most favored nations. She would oppose those policy proposals on the floor of the House every opportunity she had. But she essentially said the way to go at China is through trade. In a weird sort of way, her biggest political adversary in her entire career is probably Donald Trump. And he's the one who's going to give her what she's been advocating for decades on China. But I guess they hate each other so much, they're not trying to form some sort of bipartisan duo where they can promote these policies towards China. Why do you think she hasn't moved anywhere in that regard?
I can't tell you why Nancy Pelosi hasn't moved on trade. I can say that I know Republicans have been circulating a lot of clips, not only from Nancy Pelosi, although I haven't seen a Pelosi clip. I've seen a lot of Chuck Schumer clips that had from, probably 2 decades ago, where he was on the floor of the U.S. Senate, basically endorsing, tougher tariffs on China, a more protectionist trade policy, basically Republicans making the point that, we've come full circle and that Trump has the Democratic position of 20 years ago, and that it's come full circle. I think, the most easiest answer is rank partisanship, and Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to do anything to work with Donald Trump. But I think, the question is here is, are we willing to swallow higher prices for the near term in order to level that trade deficit with China? John, many U.S. companies outsource production to China because of its low labor costs. What do we get out of that? We get really cheap products. I mean, I was looking last night at really nice dishware made in China. Is the U.S. American consumer willing to pay more in the short term for Trump's long-term goal? The problem with Trump's long-term goal is that it's long-term. How long does it take to produce a manufacturing company or a manufacturing plant to make the iPhone back in the United States? It's not going to be within his term, likely. And most American voters don't have the patience for that. So I think that is the political problem for Trump, and probably the reason why Nancy Pelosi isn't, one of the reasons why she isn't jumping on his bandwagon.
We've had a number of lame duck presidents in our lifetimes. Certainly Bill Clinton was one, George W., Barack Obama, every president that won re-election. And even though they never had to face voters again, there were political considerations that really manipulated their behavior, or motivated their behavior, I guess I should say. Some of them had scandals in their second terms. I know with Bill Clinton, it was the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So they were focused on making sure that they survived the second term, and they focused on a lot of small ball sorts of things. When you look at Donald Trump in his second term, he doesn't have those small ball aspirations. It seems like he's trying to tackle these big issues that have been around for a long time, whether it be trade or immigration or the size of government, entitlement reform, those sorts of things. We're not used to seeing that in the White House. Do you think the public has the stomach for it?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't think we know yet. I think we need some more time in this term. We're not even at the 100-day mark. I think we're only at day 70-something or 80. I would say the distinctiveness about this Trump second term is that he had a pause in the middle. It wasn't a consecutive second term. So he had time for 4 years to sort of hibernate and plot and get a lot of smart people around him to know exactly how to orchestrate his big policy goals. So, I think on trade, this is now dominating this week. What he's trying to do on immigration and deportations is historic, but he's running into a lot of guardrails, a lot of hurdles. I mean, DOGE, obviously, is a transformation of government. He's not going to be able to get it all. And I think he's going to have to focus on a few things. I mean, the thing with Trump, he's got these big goals. He's trying to swing at home runs, but there's a lot of carve-outs. And you're seeing the concessions. You're seeing the pullback on the tariffs, even on deportation goals. They said they were going to try to deport millions of people. Now, if you talk to people around the Department of Homeland Security, they curtail that. They're not even releasing numbers on how many people they can deport because of logistical hurdles, because the cost it takes to deport people, to house them during their deportation hearings. There's a lot, it's very easy to stand up in front of a podium and say, we're going to deport these people. We're going to tariff the world. Implementation has been a lot tougher for this administration. I think there is an appetite, I think there definitely is an appetite for transformational change. I think people want a trimmer government. I think people want efficiencies. But when it hits their pocketbook, man, I think when you get businessmen, and we know Donald Trump really respects rich people, when they start losing money, he's gonna second guess. And I think on the immigration piece, we heard in the cabinet meeting today, he said there's going to be carve-outs for people that work in agriculture, for undocumented immigrants who work in hotels, hospitality. So you're already starting to see some concessions on, the big promises he made during the campaign on tariffs and immigration. I think his two pet issues.
We're speaking with David Catanese, who you can follow on X at Dave Catanese. David, despite the fact that the stock market has been kind of haywire of late, Donald Trump's poll numbers have not plummeted. In fact, his poll numbers, his approval rating is much higher than the Democratic Party's is nationally, where Democrats have been very frustrated with Chuck Schumer to the extent that they're aware of who Hakeem Jeffries is. They're certainly upset at him. We know that they were mad at Grampy Joe during the last campaign for not getting out sooner. They were mad at the performance of Kamala Harris. Do you see a form of a Democratic Party Tea Party of sorts, sort of that storm brewing, where we could ultimately end up seeing changes in leadership or the Democratic Party not getting their favored candidate as the nominee in 2028?
I don't see it yet. I covered the Tea Party. I was out in the field more in 2010. I saw a different amount of energy, and there was a visceral opposition to Obamacare. I think there are elements of it. We just had big protests around the country last weekend. There was, I think 100,000 people in D.C., but frankly, I've seen more people before on other occasions. So I think there are some seeds for it. And, obviously the Democrats should be favored in the midterms. That's basically historical precedent. It would be odd if they weren't. The party out of power has the energy. So is it equivalent to the Tea Party? I'm going to hedge on that for now. I think the Democrats are in an identity crisis. I think they will have that for a while. I actually have a little bit of a counterintuitive take. I don't think they need a leader right now. They need more of a message from multiple leaders. They're not going to have one leader. Nobody really cares about Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries day in and day out. They'll worry about that during the next presidential election, the run-up to the next presidential primary, which will be an open seat race, presumably, if Trump's not seeking a third term. So I don't think they have to worry about that now. I think they should get their issues figured out. I think the reason Kamala Harris lost, the more I read the books and the retrospectives about it, is she never knew what she wanted to do. We know what Trump wanted to do. He wanted to deport illegal immigrants. He wanted to get tough on trade, and he wanted to lower prices. What were the three things that Kamala Harris was going to do? That gives you an idea of the identity problem with the Democratic Party. She didn't know, and I don't think many Democrats know. They sort of hedge on immigration. They sort of hedge on trade, but they don't have those three big bullet points. And I think it will take them months, if not years, to get there and even have a shot at competing with Trump, who's just dominating, as he continues to do, the news and the policy debate every single day.
To the point that you just made about the books about the last presidential election, oh boy, are there amazing stories in just about all of them. I would say that there are two interesting facts that jump out at me that really explains a lot of what was going on. One was the low opinion that so many Democrats had of Kamala Harris before she became the nominee. Yeah. One of the books said that Barack Obama wanted the Democratic nominee to be Gretchen Whitmer, that he did not want the nominee to be Kamala Harris. Nancy Pelosi apparently wanted an open primary. She did not want the nomination to go to Harris, who came from her city, San Francisco, and her political start, happened because of Willie Brown, who was a close ally of Nancy Pelosi's too. Didn't matter. She thought Kamala was not a strong candidate, and she wanted an open process at the convention. We, of course, all know what James Carville thought about it. He wanted an open convention as well. In fact, he's calling for a convention before the next regularly scheduled one because he wants the Democrats to be able to start looking at these people long before they start voting in theory, to weed out candidates like Kamala Harris. The other thing that jumped out at me was how so many of them were aware of Joe Biden's deteriorating condition. They would all go on TV, or they would attack the Wall Street Journal, for example, when the Journal came out with a piece saying that he was losing it. And they would say, no. In private, he's fine. He's putting together Rubik's Cubes. He's doing advanced calculus. He's fine. We see him on a daily basis. We work with him. But when you read these books, they were all well aware that he was a shell of himself. And they weren't saying that publicly. What do you make of what we're learning from those books?
Well, I will plug, I wrote on my Substack this week. I'll plug it. It's David Catanese at Substack.com. It's called Too Close to Call for any of your listeners who want a little more of my unvarnished views. I wrote this week there that Biden's original sin really wasn't just deciding to run again. That's what everybody, keeps the parlance in D.C. is. His original sin was picking Kamala Harris as his VP when he damn well knew he was an old man. I mean, people didn't think he should run in 2020. It's remarkable that he ran that election, won the primary, was able to win in a COVID election where they basically hid him in the basement. He didn't do a lot of public events. By the time he was president, it was, you can't hide the president. You can try, but you can't hide him. I would say, I would just disagree a little bit on the impressions of him. I think when someone's losing their cognitive ability, it's not a straight line down. He had some good days. The State of the Union, he looked energetic. He looked like a guy who could run. A couple days later, he's walking down the wrong hall and needs direction and doesn't know where he's going. So as many people who get older, and we all have family members like this, you have good days and you have bad days. And I think there were some people in Congress said, no, he looks good. And then others would privately say what they would never say out loud. But really, I think it lays at his feet. He picked Kamala Harris. He said it was the best decisions he's ever made. I can't believe that he believes that, looking back on how this has all transpired, giving Donald Trump a second term. If he had picked a different person who he felt was more competent and could run a vibrant campaign, whether that be a Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, there were a million different options for him, but not really, because of the pressure to pick a woman of color. And that's where you ended up with Kamala Harris, who, as you said, really had no confidence. I mean, that was the underlined headline to me in these books, that the highest parts of the party had no confidence in her ability from the start. And yet they went and nominated her anyway in one of the most consequential elections in modern history.
If you'd like to read more about all of this and much, much more, check out David Catanese on Substack, davidcatanese.substack.com, and you can subscribe there too so you can read his reporting on a regular basis. David, you're great. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, John.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, with the end of the show quickly approaching, if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off, that's easy to do.
Search for The John Phillips Show wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. What do you say we make a couple of listeners very happy?
Let's do that right now. 790 KABC welcomes Light Up the Blues benefiting Autism Speaks, featuring Stephen Stills, Neil Young, Billy Idol, Chris Stills, Nathaniel Radcliffe, Rufus Wainwright, and more. It's all coming to the Greek Theater on April 26th. Tickets on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. But right now, caller number 9 at 1-888-795-2222 gets a pair of tickets to the show. Tickets furnished by Nederlander Concerts. Good luck dialing.
Earlier in the program, we told you about a bombshell new report in the San Francisco Standard titled Insurance Chief Lives Large on Campaign Cash as Homes Burn. Ricardo Lara has used funds from a non-existent run for office to eat and drink at some of California's fanciest restaurants, sometimes with CEO company. The author of that piece is Josh Koehn. He is kind enough to join us this afternoon. Josh, welcome.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
First of all, excellent work and reporting in this article, because we don't see a lot of investigative journalism in this state that uncovers stories that need to be told. And your reporting is certainly one of those pieces that I think will help improve the government that we receive in the state. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Tell your listeners to read the San Francisco Standard more, and they'll get more of this stuff.
All right. And that, by the way, is sfstandard.com. All right. So let's start out with the reporting, because you found that our insurance commissioner, who is in charge of regulating the insurance industry and has the ultimate say-so over things like rate increases, instead of showing up to oversight committee hearings, or instead of making himself available to the press, or instead of making himself available to ratepayers, or doing the things that we're used to seeing from commissioners past in that office, Ricardo Lara, we know, based on reporting from KGO in San Francisco, has spent a lot of time going on junkets around the globe. But when he's back home, you found he spends a lot of time going to very fancy restaurants with some movers and shakers in the insurance industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Credit to KGO to uncovering these taxpayer-funded trips that Ricardo Lara has been taking all over the globe. That actually prompted my reporting, which was to look at starting just with his campaign forms. And when I looked at them, it was almost readily apparent that something was off. He had a lot of credit card charges, and I was like, wow, that's weird. I didn't even actually know he was running for lieutenant governor, which it turns out he's not. He's not actively campaigning, but he's raising money, and he's spending even more at these restaurants and bars up and down the state and across the country. And we just started putting in the legwork. And so I started reaching out to folks, talking to sources, contacting restaurants. And I was able to obtain some receipts that show that this isn't just like, a salad and a Coke. I mean, we're talking about massive dinners with steak and appetizers, cocktails, martinis, desserts galore. So, I mean, Ricardo Lara has basically created himself what one person told me is a slush fund. And he's been using it to just dine out with all of these unknown special interests while Californians are having their auto and home insurance policies yanked or canceled, or these companies are fleeing the state. And so it's pretty egregious when you look at just how many flagrantly lavish meals he's having while people are really struggling in the state.
Well, and when he doesn't show up to something like an oversight committee hearing, or he doesn't show up to some place where you would expect him to be given the circumstances, his office always says he's busy. He has other business. They give you some nebulous answer where they don't say, well, he can't meet with you this time because he's meeting with members of Congress in Washington, D.C., but he'll be back on Tuesday. Can you do it a different day? They just say he's unavailable because he has other business, and they don't tell you what that business is. Well, now we know.
Well, yeah, and one of his meals that I wrote about in this story is about how he was having a $700 dinner with the CEO of Farmers Insurance Group, the second largest home insurer in the state of California. And this is a company whose affiliate canceled 100,000 auto insurance policies in California just 2 months after Ricardo Lara was at a restaurant in a skyscraper in L.A. eating with the CEO, having 2 bottles of wine and every little tapa and appetizer you could imagine. And we don't even know what the discussion was in that meal, but it sure doesn't sound like he's holding their feet to the fire and really actually getting them to make good faith efforts to offer policies to people who are struggling and seeing, the destruction of all these wildfires and other issues. So I think you raise a great point. He needs to be available, and he did not talk to me for this story. I think we can understand why, but he's very much should be accountable to consumers in California, because he's still got more than 2 years left on his second term here, and things are pretty bleak at the moment.
He is an enigma to so many people, because when the insurance crisis first started, we reached out to him and invited him to come on the show, primarily because ratepayers and homeowners just had a lot of questions. We just wanted him to be available so people could call in and ask him questions, those sorts of things. They won't even return an email. They will not return a call. I talk to people at other shops. Maybe he just doesn't like me. He doesn't have to like me. He doesn't have to come on this show. But I talk to people in other shops in L.A. and other markets, and they get the same treatment as me. And that's so weird because typically when you take one of these statewide constitutional offices, that's not what they would regard as the last stop on the subway. It's a stepping stone to something else. It's what you have to do to get what you actually want. So typically, they are looking for as much publicity as humanly possible. They want to get their name out there. They want to promote themselves. So when they run for governor or U.S. Senate or Congress or whatever, people know who they are. They have name ID. They're a brand. But he did the exact opposite of that. He just wanted to be in the witness protection program from the moment he got in there. And now that he's using his campaign money on all of these fancy dinners, to me, that's an indication that he doesn't plan on running for another office. I know he wanted to run for the Board of Supervisors here in Los Angeles, and Hilda Solis doesn't want him. And if she doesn't give her blessing to him, then he's never going to win that seat. So that's a no-go. The lieutenant governor account appears to be just something that's being used to store money away. Do we know if he's going to run for another office?
There's no intention that he's running for anything else. I think you're right that he did see this job of insurance commissioner as a stepping stone to something else, another higher office in the state or maybe Congress. He announced his run for insurance commissioner in early 2017. Since early 2017, we have had devastating wildfires up and down the state, and I don't think he understood the severity of what he was getting himself into. I don't think he's ever been known as a true policy wonk. He's more of someone who's very much in the scene, likes to have a good time as these meals and drinks receipts show. And I do think that he has found himself a bit stuck. And so, yeah, this idea that Ricardo Lara has some kind of political future, that was something discussed in my piece. And a state Democratic political consultant told me there is no way in hell that Ricardo Lara could win another statewide office at this point based on the way that he's handled the job as insurance commissioner.
Here's another question I don't have an answer for, and maybe you do. Given all of Ricardo Lara's problems, which now are numerous, and even before all of this, we knew that he was accepting money from the insurance industry, which he pledged that he wouldn't do, was trying to hide it, and then got caught. I think that was by the San Diego Union Tribune. And even before that, he got caught paying his rent with a credit card that belonged to the California Department of Insurance. And when he got caught on that, he said he didn't know you weren't supposed to do that. He thought that that was okay to pay your own personal rent with a department credit card. Then he had to stop doing that. Given all of his problems, and then there are other problems that he has that everyone seems to know about that haven't been in the papers. So I'm sure Gavin Newsom and the legislature are aware of at least some of those. Given the fact that this guy has 1,000,001 problems and the fact that the insurance crisis is a legitimate crisis in California and if not addressed properly will get worse, why do you think Newsom was so eager to give that issue to Lara and the legislature did the same? None of them want any part of it, and they are perfectly happy to make Ricardo Lara the face.
Yeah, I think actually you raise a really good question here. And talking to people, my suspicion based on what they've told me is that Ricardo Lara doesn't want the insurance industry to completely collapse in California on his watch. He doesn't want that to be his legacy. And by extension, Governor Gavin Newsom also doesn't want that, because what does that do to the housing market that's so dependent on homeowners having the ability to insure their properties? I think what we're seeing here is a kowtowing to the insurance industry to a point, but also, understanding that basically these are elected officials who very much want to get out of their second term and have a future. And I would say the reason that you have Newsom probably not cracking down harder on his insurance commissioner is because he doesn't want his legacy as California governor to be the collapse of the insurance industry.
Do you think, because it's not only Ricardo Lara, Matt Haney, which your paper and you have been reporting on for quite some time.
Very familiar with Matt Haney, yes.
the assemblyman from San Francisco who has used slush fund money, campaign money to go to Giants games and 49er games and Broadway shows and other events. desirable events that you have reported on. He represents a district that is a very safe Democratic district. He does not have to worry about a Republican beating him. Ricardo Lara was able to win 2 terms statewide. How much of a function of this do you think is that we're in a one-party state, and when you think you're bulletproof, you don't think anyone could ever defeat you? You do things that you would otherwise probably not do.
Yeah, I think there could be some of that. I think that people do feel like incumbency in a heavily blue state, insulates them to a point that, like, maybe they don't have to take as bold of positions, or maybe they get a little too free with their office holder and campaign accounts when it comes to money and lifestyle expenses. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a partisan thing. I do think that actually it's just a matter of politics, in the sense of, like, a lot of people get into politics for the right reasons. They want to represent their community. They feel aggrieved or feel pissed off that something happened and no one was doing anything about it. But what we see time and time again is the people who stay in politics and become career politicians are not necessarily staying in it for the right reasons. They're staying in it for jobs. They're staying in it for the clout. The fact that everywhere they go, someone says, "Thank you for coming and please speak." I do think that there's a lot to the fact that when you've been an elected official or a politician long enough, you stop thinking like a rational person. You start thinking that you deserve things, and that, the rules may not apply to you because you've earned this title. And so I do think that Democrats are obviously seeing a lot of dissatisfaction with the status quo here in California. I did write about a candidate for governor named Steve Hilton, who is a Republican who seems to have a potential lane if and when he decides to formally announce his run for governor for next year. I think Democrats should be taking this serious. I think this talk of Kamala Harris becoming governor next year, essentially being anointed as the Democratic candidate, it's dangerous for their party, and it's also how they lost the White House in a lot of ways. So I think Democrats are doing a lot of soul searching within California and across the country when it comes to bad behavior and abusing the office. I would say that that's just more symptomatic of politics in general.
Last question before you go. The man who wants to replace Ricardo Lara as insurance commissioner and will likely be the choice of the Democratic Party is Mike McGuire, the president pro tem of the Senate. Mike McGuire so far has been an ally of Ricardo Lara. In fact, he is in charge of deciding who sits on what committees in the Senate, including the Insurance Committee, and that has been a committee that has been defensive of Ricardo Lara, and they've been scheduling these oversight hearings when he's been traveling and out of town, and they've been willing to accept a representative from his office instead of him showing up and answering their questions. If Ricardo Lara's career and office gets just totally overwhelmed by scandal, and you're the guy that's been helping him along the way and running interference for legislative oversight, that's not a good look as you try to mount your own campaign to replace him as insurance commissioner. What do you see happening with that relationship over time if these ugly stories about Ricardo Lara continue?
Well, Ricardo Lara's got a little over a year and a half left to go in office. A lot can happen, as we know, in politics in just a short amount of time. And I would say I'm not super familiar with McGuire and Lara's relationship and how close they are, but I would say that anyone who's going to be following up as the next insurance commissioner, they're going to have so many problems that people are not even going to be thinking about Ricardo Lara in 2 years. They're going to be worried about so many other issues. We see how the news cycle has gotten so fast. I think it could dog McGuire when it comes to the campaign. I think that that's a valid thing to be raised and discussed, and he'll have to address it. But when it comes to actually doing the job of insurance commissioner, I've had multiple people tell me they don't think it should be an elected position anymore. That they think it compromises people in different ways. And I mean, there's pros and cons of having it be appointed and how that can be political as well. But the insurance commissioner might now be the worst job in California politics. Before, it was just something that was just an afterthought on the ballot, So I think I question if McGuire really does want that job. The more he sees what's happening in the state, and also just now the scrutiny that's going to be on that position, whoever follows Ricardo Lara should expect a microscope.
The piece is Insurance Chief Lives Large on Campaign Cash as Homes Burn in the San Francisco Standard. You can read it online at sfstandard.com. I retweeted the article written by Josh Koehn, who is the guest that we have on right now. Josh, excellent reporting. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Hey, super appreciate it. You have a good one.
You too. It's the John Phillips Show.